Coral reefs play an important role in many aspects. They provide coastal protection from storms and floods. Coral reefs also contribute to economies across the world, particularly through the tourism industry.
Without the barrier reef, the storms that we would get in this area would devastate the islands, the coastlines. And so for us, corals play a very important role when it comes to climate change, because we know that they absorb carbon, and they also slow down the storm, the wave action and so forth. And they provide food and livelihood to many of the people on the coastlines. I mean, there are so many tourists that we get just coming out here just to see the corals that we have.
Belize has the largest barrier reef, or the largest coral reef system in the northern hemisphere. It is under threat from coral bleaching.
The way how coral bleaching works is, first of all, corals are an animal, they're animals. And there's an algae, which is a plant that lives inside the coral. Because they photosynthesize, they allow the corals to get the color that they have. When the temperatures get too hot for the corals and the algae say, you know what, boy, I gotta go. It's too hot, I can't stay in here anymore. And so they expel themselves from the coral, and the coral loses its color, and that's what the coral bleaching is. So, but when corals bleach, when you see that white, they're not technically dead. We here at Fragments of Hope consider corals dead when it's white, but you see like other algae growing on top of the coral.
As the world's temperature increases and affects climate change trends, corals are being exposed to severe heat. Coral bleaching has become a global crisis. Belize is no exception. Vernon says incidents of coral bleaching are now being recorded much earlier in the year than times before. The highly possible worst-case scenario, according to Dr. Colin Young, the executive director at the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, is the loss of 70 to 90% of the world's coral reef.
Ironically, you ask, because this year is one of the world's worst year for coral bleaching happening all over the world. Why? Because ocean temperatures have been the hottest they've ever been since recorded history. But more importantly, we're also working with organizations like Fragments of Hope, who I believe you also met yesterday, who are looking at how do you replant or repopulate reefs with climate-resistant varieties of corals. And while this is a very small-scale example, the idea is that it's a pilot, that once it is successful, it can be scaled up across the region.
One non-governmental organization is fighting back against the effects of climate change on corals. Fragments of Hope works to restore corals destroyed by natural disaster and impacted by coral bleaching. The organization's largest and longest standing nursery exists just off the coast of Laughing Bird Caye. A media trip to the island gave reporters a first-hand look at their work.
What I can tell you will see personally today is 16-year-old palmatas, which are acroporides, 16-year-old standing elkhorns out here surviving from tremendous, devastation, whether if it's climate change with the natural disaster, whether it's, caused by human. It's still standing. After 16 years, we have standing outplanted corals out here. We also have very tiny, small baby fragmentation that we planted just right before the bleaching session last year that is actually still looking pretty much alive as well. When we choose genets to outplant, when we go and collect from what we call our mother coral, from different locations, whether if it's closer to shore, whether it's closer to the reef or in between the reef, because there's a big exchange whereby we take stuff from near shore out to the reef and from the reef inshore, simply to see how these coral genets and species are working with the different climate, the temperature, when we move them around.
Coral reefs are also home to a large variety of marine life, putting Belize's fisheries stock at risk of significant decline. Notwithstanding the work Fragments of Hope accomplished, Dr. Young says more must be done urgently.
These impacts are small and the scale is tiny. And if you think about the size of the reef, not just in Belize, but across the region, there is no better way to stop this deterioration than for us to stop putting greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We cannot adapt our way out of climate change. It's too costly, it's happening too fast, and these species have evolved under a certain set of stable conditions, stable climate over a long period of time.
Reporting for News 5, I am Paul Lopez.